A huge welcome to Blockshop. A huge welcome to all of you out there watching and participating in today's Science Talks. It is always very nice to have you with us, even though you may be from afar. Today's Science Talk is very dear to me, both in terms of our speaker and our topic. So it is such an honor to introduce Associate Professor Anne Tietjen from Landscape Architecture and Planning, University of Copenhagen. Anna and I met each other at the newly established network DARE, with all the universities and schools of architecture in Denmark coming together to debate, discuss the research agenda in terms of urbanism, architecture, and research. And through that network, Anna and I learned about Anna's research project that we will hear much more about today, and were very enthusiastic about the need to engage citizens, discuss publicness, but more than anything, the method which is developed during this research project, namely the use of exhibition when it comes to citizen engagement and publicness. So please, again, a welcome to you, Anne. I've looked so much forward to today. It's such an honor that you want to participate in our science talks here at Blockshop, where we always strive to have science topics that are of relevance. And I think it's very fair to say when it comes to urban development, urban spaces, publicness, and citizen engagement, there is such a great need to learn more and develop and engage. During our talk today, you are more than welcome to ask questions in the chat function on YouTube. And also stay with us because, as some of you may have noticed, Anna and I have, before today, had a lovely conversation about the research project. But we are not done with our talk, so we would like to also discuss other matters after Anna's presentation. So please stay with us. And again, a warm welcome. And thank you, Anna, for participating, coming here today. And I'll leave you to give your presentation.
Thank you, Pernille. Good afternoon. Thanks to Science Talks and to you, Pernille, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here today to share and discuss experiences with architecture exhibitions as a tool for collaborative research in the European research project Public Space in European Social Housing, short PUSH or PUSH Housing. I will first briefly introduce the PUSH project and the background for our research, and then focus on how we actually use architecture exhibitions for collaborative knowledge making in our project. What are our experiences with architecture exhibitions in collaborative public space research? And then finally, I will reflect upon our learnings from the project. What can architecture exhibitions contribute to collaborative knowledge making on public space? And what impact can this approach potentially have? How can knowledge produced in more democratic ways matter on the ground? What new insights about public space in social housing can we generate in this way? And how can these new insights contribute to positive change in the future of social housing? And after my talk, I hope for a good discussion, not only with Pernille, but also with you out there via the chat function, about the value of democratization of public space research and urban research in general, and the potential role of architecture exhibitions in this context. So this is actually us, the team who works together on the project, and we are a great diversity of people, a great diversity of research fields, but as you may have noticed very quickly, we are all women, and that is a big quality of the project, but that's just a side remark. So to the background for our projects. Social housing estates are often problematized as places of segregation and disintegration in European cities, but they are also potentially a prime locus of encounters between people of different cultural origins and social backgrounds. This double perspective was the starting point for us to investigate public spaces in European social housing estates. The dark picture at the top actually shows one of our cases, Lotto O, in the suburban town of Ponticelli in Naples. And if you look to the very right of the picture, you can see the Mount Vesuvius to the right in the picture. And the picture at the bottom shows a dinner arranged by Turkish women for our research team at VU Midtpunkt, our Danish study area, in the suburban town of Farum, north of Copenhagen. The PUSH research project investigates public spaces on European social housing estates to better understand how social and cultural encounters happen or how they don't happen. We study dynamic interactions between people and the physical spaces they share, guided by the research question: how do people and architecture mutually affect each other so that living with others that are different from oneself becomes possible? By working with exhibitions, we aim to develop a novel approach to studying and representing public spaces as what we call sites of publicness. We want to use exhibitions not only as a tool for knowledge exchange, but also for transdisciplinary knowledge development with multidisciplinary researchers from 4 countries. We are architects, landscape architects, urban planners, architectural historians, anthropologists, and sociologists. And we work together with many non-academic partners, from an art photographer to housing associations and national and European NGOs. And we also work together with residents and institutions and citizens associations in the social housing estates that we investigate. And another thing that we want to experiment with is relational representations of physical spaces as sites of publicness. So not looking only at the architecture of the spaces, but also what these spaces actually do and what kind of publicness or public life actually occurs in these spaces. Now, exhibitions are a well-proven format for architectural communication, but they are also a format for stimulating debate about architecture. We can increasingly see experiments with critical formats for exhibitions, which, for example, examine the agency of architecture for social innovation, such as the 2010 exhibition Small Scale Big Change at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or exhibitions that propose exhibiting or the exhibiting space as an exploratory space to address urgent political challenges of our times, such as the franchise exhibition Weltstadt, World City, which traveled all around the world with contributions from many different cities, actually also Copenhagen. Here this is actually the Copenhagen version of the Weltstadt exhibition that guested the Copenhagen Architecture Festival in 2016. These exhibitions, which are critical formats, are aimed at a wider audience and stimulate political discussions about what architecture does, could do, and should do. And in the PUSH project, we follow a similar approach to interrogate public spaces beyond architectural objects. To examine dynamic interactions between spaces and people, we combine many forms of media representation: text, architectural drawings, maps, diagrams, photos, video, and spatial models. The basic format of our exhibitions is a wallpaper made of prints in A3 portrait format, which can be reproduced inexpensively on any office printer and whose arrangement can be adapted to different spaces. Here you can see the exhibition space at our Italian exhibition in Naples at the top, and the first exhibition that we had in Copenhagen at the University of Copenhagen. So 2 very different exhibition spaces, but the same format, very easily to be adapted. In the course of the project, we make a series of physical and web-based exhibitions in which and with which the publicness of spaces in social housing is examined, mediated, and discussed with different audiences. And what we want to do is to use exhibitions to make things public. On the one hand, by examining and conveying how physical spaces become public, And also by discussing and developing our findings with researchers, residents, interest organizations, politicians, planners, and other stakeholders to reveal the challenges, the potentials, political issues on the ground, and formulate public issues, political issues that are important together on the basis of these exhibitions. And also, hopefully gather an interested public in this way for dealing with these issues. So what one could say is that our exhibitions do not only want to exhibit public space or be exhibitions about public space in social housing. They want to create a public space in itself where exchange about public spaces and a publicness in its own right is possible to happen. But how to make things, and in our case the public spaces in social housing, public, and create a public space through an exhibition. Following the theorist of science, Bruno Latour, this requires bringing together two separate understandings of representation, or at least meanings of the word representation that were previously separated from another, at least in theory. On the one hand, the scientific representation of the matters at hand, whereby empirical accuracy is important, asking what is to be considered about public spaces. And then on the other hand, the political representation of the people concerned by these matters. And here legitimacy is important. So who is it actually who is to be concerned with these issues that we bring forward? And the key, obviously, is the phrase bringing together, because it is precisely about combining ethical political questions with empirical ones and finding suitable forms of communication and media representation. In our project, we work with an exploratory approach. At 4 transnational workshops, we exhibit preliminary research results and discuss them with different audiences of participating researchers, non-academic project partners, and other contributors, and sometimes also invited guests. And on the basis of this critical dialogue in and around the exhibitions, we clarify, reject, and develop research questions, discuss thematic, theoretical or methodological issues for the following exhibition, and try out forms of communication and media representation. The physical exhibitions are then collected in an edited form as a dynamic online exhibition on the website pushhousing.eu, and this is just a snapshot from the website. And so every time we have held an exhibition, we edit the work and then we put it up here. So this exhibition is continuously growing and continuously revised and adapted, so you're very welcome to check this out after the talk. We also post regularly on our project Instagram account, Push Housing. The first Push Research exhibition took place as a closed event, meaning it was only the people who were invited to it who participated, at our first transnational project workshop in Copenhagen in September 2019. And here all academic partners and associate partners met for the first time. So we started our work on the project. This exhibition visualized the content and methodological structure of the project. And in this way, it established a platform for sharing and debating content and methods. It showed the 5 cases that we investigate by aerial photos, typical plans and sections, timelines of the development of the places, and fact sheets as about different information, how many people live there, what is the basic typology of the buildings, and things like that. It also showed first explorations of publicness on these housing estates, guided by 4 analytical categories that we work with: democracy, heritage, policies and practices, and informality. And each of these categories has its own color code. So when you see, for example, the pink color, that means now we are dealing with the category of heritage. Or if you see the purple color, then it is all about informality and publicness. And this wallpaper format displayed all the material on one long wall, and in this way it enabled us to perceive and discuss potential connections across cases and categories and give us a good start into the project. The second exhibition took place at the second workshop in Naples in January 2020, just before everything was closed down for the COVID-19 lockdown. And this was a meeting of academic partners and some of the local partners of the Italian team. And you can see now that all the material is purple. So this is because this exhibition actually dealt with the theme of the main theme of the Italian team, which is publicness and informality. And this exhibition was open to academic staff, students, and invited guests. And for this exhibition, we did not predefine what informal publicness is. Rather, we wanted to explore publicness and informality through differences rising from our different contexts, cultures, and research perspectives involved in our project. So this was not something that we had planned before, but it was an idea that the Italian team came up with to invite all the other teams to make themselves also a little investigation of publicness and informality on their side, and in that way to challenge their own notion of informality. Of course, we were sent on the road with the ideas that the Italians already had formulated, but from there was a great openness to explore. And so this is also a format that we since then have continued, so that always when we work with a new theme at the next workshop, then we all do an exploration of this theme on our own case, and in that way work across cases and categories. And here you can also see that this is me with a colleague from Norway, and we use this space of the exhibition to discuss specific issues and specific spaces together, and really use this as a space for starting a debate. The third exhibition was supposed to take place on site at the Fjell Estate in Dram, Norway, this year in September. And we actually had already postponed the workshop from April to September in the hope that then COVID-19 restrictions would be lifted and we would be allowed to all meet physical. But unfortunately, due to traveling restrictions, we had to move this whole workshop online. And this was obviously a challenge for us because we couldn't go and visit the site together. We couldn't talk to local people and local actors as it had been the plan, and it had also been the plan to do the exhibition physically on site, which was then not possible. But the online format also was an opportunity for close-up discussions of each team's work on publicness and democracy in the public spaces of our 5 social housing estate. So while we couldn't display all the exhibition material together at the same time, we had the chance to discuss specific findings on specific spaces and look more closely at issues of representation. And not only in terms of visual ways of communicating findings, but also in terms of articulating political matters at hand, and in terms of giving voice to the people concerned by these matters. And I would like to give you just one example to illustrate these 3 ways of working with representation. So, and the example that I want to show you stems from the social housing estate Lotto O in the suburban town of Ponticelli in Naples. And here researcher Marilena Prisco from the University of Naples had gained the trust of mothers from Lotto O to tell her their experiences with public spaces at Lotto O and how the mothers engage in shaping the publicness of spaces in democratic ways, and what are their matters of concern with regard to the shared spaces at Lotto O. And for the exhibition, Marilena then had made a video to document these experiences, where we actually will be able to see the spaces and listen to the voices of the mothers, what they say, but we cannot see their faces. So in this way, they get exposed as little as possible. So looking back at the first year of our transdisciplinary collaboration, and we have a year and a half more to go, what can architecture exhibitions contribute to collaborative public space research? And what may be potential impacts of doing research in this way? So what we can already say is that making exhibitions together stimulates productive and sometimes controversial dialogue among researchers while doing the research. So bringing our research to the table in this not completely ready format that we also know if you are yourself in architecture, urbanism, you might have the experience with pin-ups, where we put up work on the way and then discuss how to further develop it. And this is something that we are quite familiar with as architects, but that anthropologists or sociologists whom we work together maybe have less experience with. And then maybe more for them than for us, it's also a shift of format. Instead of working with texts and photos, it's a more open, a more experimental way maybe of doing research together, but it's also a way of putting things forward that are not finished. And then you are more open also to discuss what is it that you have actually found, and to get it challenged by what others perceive. So it's actually really a way to create knowledge together. And when we did the first exhibition, which you can see here in the pictures, it was all rather perfect because I worked together with a graphic designer and made the first take on the exhibition as more of a layout proposal of the whole thing, and everything looked rather smooth, also because it was presented on this one big long white wall, and it was not so much material yet. And in the second and the third exhibition, the material was going in many more different directions. It was maybe not so neatly arranged, but it was also in many ways more provocative, also more provoking discussions, because it also gave the impression of being less finished. And then we could also discuss with each other how we wanted to further develop this material towards what we would then publish online and publicly available for everybody. But also what we could learn, as both about our different analytical categories, obviously very focused on one category at the time, both at the Italian workshop about informality and at the Norwegian workshop about democracy and democratic performances of public spaces. But also about how we do representations and how we can actually represent local people in our work. How do we make it clear when it is us as researchers who are speaking, or when we are actually giving voice to local people? And in that way, it's of course also a way to engage and give voice to local actors, as we have just seen in the video made by our Italian colleague Marilena Presco. But it's also stimulating us to reflect upon what that actually means in doing research about public space. And then one thing that was also really important was that it gave us a platform to engage students in the research, get them interested in the topic, but also very hands-on do education-based research, as where students both were involved in registrations on site, in doing mappings, in elaborating representations that then were shown in the exhibitions, but also sometimes working more in parallel with our work. So this is a good way to get people involved in many ways in this in the work. Then the wallpaper format displays research findings all at once, and that is a very practical thing, which you also all are familiar with when you work with architecture and know pin-ups, that you put everything up on a wall and then you can go back and forth between, for example, discussions that happen at different scales, or things that are about a certain kind of program or a certain space. So, and here you can also in the same way go back and forth between different cases and findings about specific spaces or what specific people have said or found about a space, and you can take it in all at once and do comparisons. Cross-links among cases can be established, and also among analytical approaches. But also it becomes more clear what may be particularities of the individual cases. How are Lotto O and, for example, Farum Midtpunkt in Denmark different from each other, but where may they also be things that they have in common. So this is a very good way of putting things up front in a visual and very bold and easily to perceive way. And being specific about spaces and how they enable or prevent public life also helped us identify political matters of concern, as a very specific ones, like the ones put forward by the mothers here in Lotto O, but that can then also point to broader issues, such as the issue of neglect of public spaces in the absence of state welfare in the Italian case, which is much more far-reaching than just the case and the very specific issues that the mothers have experienced here in Lotto O. And then another thing that I unfortunately cannot illustrate here with an image, but which is really interesting and that Pernille and I also discussed in our little conversation, being specific and showing the spaces visually also allows for critical discussion of different interpretations of what is actually going on in the different cases. And I just give you this one example that we already discussed. A small guerrilla garden, you know, what I mean, these small improvised appropriations of a public space with some gardening done by people in informal ways. In the vast, anonymous and super well-maintained green spaces of the Fjell Estate in Drammen, is this an example of a radical democratic appropriation by people for their own desires that might be very different from the official ones? And in the context of highly defined and controlled public spaces on a cooperative housing estate in a Nordic welfare country, appropriating a small piece of land for alternative uses may indeed require some courage and some pertinence to keep it going. But seen from the perspective of our colleagues in Italy who do research on a place like Lotto O, this small guerrilla garden is not a very radical act. So context plays a big role, and maybe we can also agree that this is not a very radical act to do this small guerrilla garden. But I can also understand that in the Norwegian context, it's just something that stands out in the landscape that this little intervention is placed in. And one thing that was really important, and maybe one of the most important things to me, or a learning that I had through this project, is that the exhibition format, as doing exhibitions in this way, raised difficult ethical questions about politics of representation and also about our self-positioning as researchers in the project. So whom do we give voice with our research, and how do we do that? In what ways do we voice, for example, the voices of the mothers? And whom and whose space do we also maybe overlook as researchers? And what problems may our well-meant representations create for local people on the ground? It's very, very difficult to know. You can't really know what they might stir. So you might want to be extremely careful and attentive with how you actually go about things. And it was not by accident that I mentioned that Marlena gained the trust of the mothers before she even could do the interview. So this is not just walking on a site with your microphone and doing interviews. It requires a lot of work that maybe in our Danish context would be difficult to qualify as part of a research, but that is deeply necessary to be able to do this work in the first place. So that was a very valuable learning for me, but I think also across the project. So, and while the immediate impact on the futures of social housing certainly is limited, the exhibition format really provides a space for researchers from different fields and countries to produce and share and communicate and critically discuss insights on public space in European social housing together with non-academic partners, and maybe most importantly also with concerned local people. So what may be my main point today is that exhibiting as a more in terms of the act of making exhibitions collaboratively and exploratively is more important than the exhibition as a final product, as in terms of documentation and communication of research results. Also that is of course also important, and I'm very happy for our website and for being able to share what we do. And I also think that towards the end of the project, this kind of issues will become more important. But I think that this really using exhibitions as a method for making knowledge in collaborative ways is what I take with me, and what I think could be much further developed, because you can achieve knowledge which is rooted in the local places and the people that we have investigated, and also investigated together with the people. And that gives me a hope that this knowledge then can also empower both people and places, because it can put forward otherwise overlooked political matters of concern, and that way also provide a basis for future action, as a very specifically and on the ground, as a specific issues that may be in specific social housing estates, but also broader issues that we need to address at a city or a national or maybe even. Yeah. And just a short disclaimer: the project Public Space in European Social Housing is supported by Humanities in the European Research Era, HERA, and conducted by the University of Copenhagen, NMBU in Norway, ETH Zurich, and the University of Naples, Federico II, in the framework of the HERA research program Public Spaces, Cultural Integration in Europe, 2019 to 2020. And this little disclaimer at the end means that you are actually welcome to go to our website and use all the material that is published there freely, as long as you disclose where you have found it. So this is also a way of sharing the work that we do while we are doing it. And the website can be found at pushhousing.eu.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'll join you on stage. And I thought there are we've had a few talks about this, and we tend to go off and talk for a very long time, because we get very enmeshed into the different themes. So I'm looking for help, just to, if you can give us about 10 minutes to let me know if so we don't dive into one of our lengthy conversations, and bear with us, those of you out there watching. But it is very interesting, because when we talked about it, one of the aspects that we really reflected on, or you reflected on, and you've also touched upon it in your presentation, is when you're collaborating about the method and not at the result. You're not critiquing or reviewing each other's papers, but that aspect of co-collaboration as you're developing the understanding as researchers. That was one thing that you made I thought very interesting observation, that it had changed the type of collaboration, the cross-disciplinary in itself, but also the way that you've been co-collaborating, co-creating throughout the process. And I think it came across very strongly in your presentation, that sense there is almost an aspect of vulnerability that becomes very strong in a positive sense, that there's a shared space between you as researchers as you're co-creating. Is that correctly observed on my part?
And it might also really have something to do with I think I have an urge to go back to this image. It's also here of all of us.
Yes.
So I think it also really depends a lot on the people we are. It's not just the fault of the method, but there is really a great engagement of everyone, and it's really a lot of work every time to produce all this content for the exhibitions. And I mean, when we started out, there was this idea that everyone would produce like content for their exhibition on their issue, and then we would all discuss it. But then very quickly, because the Italians did it the way they did, and we also already had done a little experiment with it on the theme of heritage in Copenhagen, it became more of a joint exhibition thing. And that is, of course, a lot of work for everybody, because then everybody also needs to produce something for all of the workshops, but it also gets you more engaged. Also it's just a more collaborative way of producing findings, and it's also more and more becoming a way of distillating topics that we want to explore more, for example, through collaboratively written research articles. So it's also a way of shifting medium and discussing your research in a different way. And I'm not saying that writing papers together can also be a very fine collaborative way. And of course, there you also start writing and sketching and not sharing unfinished thoughts with each other. It's just a different way of doing it, and it allows more people to engage in it at the same time. So,
and I think in that sense, this is very, very fascinating. We also talked about that action research, there are so many different ways and different experiences and different traditions. But in this project, you're actually bringing in a new method in co-collaborating, co-creating, engaging the citizens that I certainly haven't seen in older action research projects, and I think that creates a different voice, possibly.
I think that this is not the first time that researchers have worked with exhibitions and research, but this is our take on it, and to me and to us, it's a new experience, and it is certainly a very good way, and something that was not so clear from the beginning also was that we would, or some of our research teams would, to such an extent, involve local voices in the research. So this is also something that has not been completely planned from the start. So it's also just a very good way of getting you to work together. Also having this, in a way, this project of the exhibition together throughout the project is a very good way of keeping the collaborative work going, and also you say gathering other people or connecting other people, like the mothers in Lotte O, to the research.
Do you think, because you say also in terms of whose voice is represented, that becomes quite stark, or it becomes visible, obviously, but do you also find that in the project of making the exhibition, that you become more aware of actually of making sure that other people's voices are represented?
Yes, I think so, definitely, that they are represented, but also how they are represented. So obviously you always have to declare your sources when you do research, but this is a slightly different way, and it's also an issue, for example, for Marlena here in the video, just because now everyone has seen that, so I use it as an example all the time. But she has not named the names of the mothers. They are anonymous, but you can hear their voices, and the places that they talk about and the stories, they are illustrated in a visual way, so that even though this video is only a couple of minutes, everyone gets a quick, clear idea of what are actually spaces where there may be an issue, or where these women are engaged in issues in this space. So it's a very good way of getting around this, that you don't want to expose your sources, but at the same time you also make it very clear who is talking.
Yeah. It became very clear with the commitment in their voices.
Yes.
It also became, it's a very moving example, I think, in what you're also saying, the lack of public space in some of these areas, because there was a public space and now it's private. And I think that it became a very stark example of that. And I thought that when you in your presentation, when you're looking in these various social housing estates, the lack of public space.
Yes. As I mean, in Denmark, we're talking, as we are used to these Jan Gehl discussions about the open spaces in suburban housing estates. No? So where there is an abundance of public space and there's no life. And here it almost feels like the opposite. There's actually a lot of life that would like to have space, but there's no really usable space.
And that's why also the example of the guerrilla garden in Norway contrasted to this that it becomes very stark because it is a contrast, because here there is a lack of public space. So that kind of radical activism or appropriation, as you said, that you can have the context matters in how you perceive those various examples.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, we have talked a lot also in the project about this obvious stark contrast between the Italian case and the broadly the three welfare state cases or four actually in Switzerland, Denmark and Norway. Yeah. But it's not only that, you know, the Italian case always is just in opposition to the others, but that things that now it's difficult to find a good example, but sometimes it's maybe more interesting, instead of saying, okay, this is just totally different from the other children in the class and dismiss it, also in a way like that, to see, okay, but this may also show us something that we just tend to completely overlook in our Danish or Norwegian or Swiss cases, because we have just a different way of looking. As I mean, as researchers, we are also very shaped by the work that we have already done and by the prejudices at the end of the day that we have developed in that way. And so this research is challenging. At least my perception a lot.
It was one of the things that we actually talked a lot about, because in the Lotto O estate, they're Italian residents. So the assumption of who lives there in terms of prejudices, as we were talking about, that is also an area which can be contested, because we have different examples. Because we're not all the same. The estates are not all the same.
The estates are not all the same, and the kind of people who live there are not the same. Now, so for example, when you think this very first picture or the very first idea that we started from, that there are these very segregated social housing estates, and Lotto O is definitely an example of that, of a highly segregated place where very poor part of the population is living, and is very much segregated from the more affluent part of the city. And then we had this idea that there are also these encounters possible between people from different cultural and social backgrounds, and obviously we had this our Danish and maybe also the Norwegian and Swiss idea about who lives in social housing estates, as where we have also a mix of people, because refugees and guest workers move to these places, so they are often a rather multicultural or at least potentially multicultural place. And in Denmark we also have public housing in the sense that it is in principle accessible for everyone, so it's not only the poorest part of the population who lives there, but a more mixed population. But this is just not the case in the Italian case. So
in that sense there was a contrast. In that sense there is a stark contrast.
There is a stark contrast, yeah.
Which is a good, or from a European perspective, it is very valuable that we are reminded of those contrasts.
Yes.
Yeah. What, I think on a closing note, what has surprised you the most so far in the project?
I don't know. Maybe really that this is so much more about the process than the result, but then at the end of the day it's also not really true, but because of course all the work that we do as the visual work that we do with the exhibition and what Marlena, for example, has done with the video is extremely important. So you cannot just reduce it to process. As it's this kind of process around the making of these exhibitions and how that actually works. And I haven't really made up my mind about it because I'm obviously very occupied with organizing
Yes, it is.
it. And but it's I think this is something that can really be developed much more.
I'm very happy that you actually that this is what has surprised you. It was one of the things that I really thought about during your presentation was exactly the potential empowerment in the process, but that potential empowerment would also be in the product. So I was exactly...
Yes, they depend on each other completely.
Exactly. So I was sitting there thinking, this is mind-boggling because there is so much potential.
But how we land that in the final exhibition, that is, I must say, still unclear to me. But I think that we will get there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
And I hope that we will be able at probably a little later than planned in the first place, like sometime maybe first in 2022 when we hopefully can come out of our COVID-19 lockdowns, then there will be a big physical exhibition in Copenhagen that will also be publicly accessible, and I really look forward to be able to share our work then. Yeah.
And all of you who've attended, I hope that this is what we look forward to so that we can actually see it together. And it has been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking time out to share this with us. There are so many key learnings, so many thoughts going through my head, and I hope in your heads out there, and I hope you've enjoyed today's Science Talks. It was exactly as we dream of a science talk, a deep dive into a complex area, but conveyed and explained so beautifully. So thank you so very, very much. Thank you to all of you who've participated today. I look forward to seeing you at our next Science Talks. And again, have a very good day, and thank you, Anne.
Thank you.